This is early on in the book after he's discovered Anne Frank in the attic. And he's struggling with what to do because he's Jewish and it's Anne Frank and he doesn't know whether to call the police or can he really throw her out? Is she crazy? What should he do? So this is him trying to figure out an answer. You expect certain things when you move to the country. You just do. You expect these things because you've seen the films, you've watched the TV episodes. You expect dishonest carpenters and creepy locals. You expect deer eating your petunias and raccoons toppling your garbage. You expect poison ivy and power outages and colorful neighbors and mice. You don't expect arson, and you sure as hell don't expect Anne Frank. Kugel sat on the edge of his bed, staring down at the telephone in his hand. Behind him, Bree snored softly in her blissful, oblivious slumber. The numbers on her arm. They were a problem. A big fucking problem. If she didn't have numbers on her arm, he would have phoned the police immediately. Maybe not immediately. No need to frighten the child. But when they had gone, phone the police without delay. But she had numbers. Didn't she? He had seen them, those damned numbers. And the numbers meant that Anne Frank or not, consumed by madness or not, half dead or not, rotting like a 100-year-old corpse or not, the old woman was a goddamn Holocaust survivor. Which was a problem. Was he really going to throw an elderly, half-mad Holocaust survivor out of his house? Speak of madness, he could never do it. He knew that, even if she was old and emotionally damaged enough to think she was Anne Frank. Pity was a funny thing. It would be easier to throw out the real Anne Frank than it would be to throw out a Holocaust survivor so fucked up by the Holocaust that she thought she was Anne Frank. Can you imagine the headlines? Can you imagine the outrage? Local man evicts Anne Frank. Jew drops dime on Holocaust survivor. Brutalized by Nazis, tossed out by a Jew. One survivor's tragic story of something. If he'd heard the story, he would join in the outcry himself. He were watching TV one night and the news came on, and they reported with all their practiced shock and disgust that a man had thrown an elderly, broken Holocaust survivor out of his home. Would he not share in their outrage? And wouldn't he be right to do so? The story gets weirder, the smiley anchorman would say. The homeowner was a Jew. Boy, oh boy, the smiling anchorman would add, now I've heard everything. Now I have heard everything. But what could he do? Let this crazy old woman live in his attic? It was absurd. For how long? A week? A month? A year? Until whatever Holocaust she thought she was hiding from came to whatever end she thought it would come to? Until she dropped dead? And what if she really was Anne Frank? It wasn't impossible. They'd found former Nazi officers in Rio, hadn't they? Ex-camp commandants in New Jersey, one out a famous survivor in Stockton. Could he take that chance? What if he called the police and they came over and cuffed her and dragged her out of his house and discovered that, oh my God, my goodness, it really is Anne Frank, she is alive. He would forever be known as the person, the Jewish person, that reported Anne Frank to the authorities. Even if he could survive the shame, even if he could weather the ignominy of it all, he could never survive the look on Mother's face when she found out. He had a better chance of surviving the Holocaust itself. My own son, she would say, ratting out at Anne Frank. You had to call the police, she would say. What's the matter? You didn't have Dr. Mengele's number? He doesn't make house calls? You want Elie Wiesel's address? Maybe you could turn him in, too. No, hell no. There would be no police, of that much Kugel was certain. He would find another way. The old lady would die soon from the looks of it. Maybe he could wait it out. But then what? Hello, police? There's a dead woman in my attic? Her name? Well, funny story. Kugel gently placed the phone back in its cradle, and sliding quietly from bed, knelt down beside the vent on the floor. He listened. Maybe he dreamed it. Maybe she'd gone. If only I'd found shit, thought Kugel. If only I'd found an arsonist. Bree shifted, turned on her side, and mumbled something in her sleep. She isn't going to like this, Kugel thought as he watched her. She isn't going to like this at all. He'd already allowed one crazy old lady into the house, his mother, and they were still waiting for her to die. A physician, said Professor Jove, is but a criminal dealer of the narcotic of hope. Kugel got to his feet and slid quietly into bed. He first began seeing Professor Jove the previous year. He was having a difficult time sleeping. The anxiety and anger that had been building within him for some time were threatening to spill over, and he was determined to do whatever was necessary to be the husband Bree deserved and the father Jonah needed. He'd seen analysts in the past, but psychiatry was too narrow a scope for him now. Professor Jove, however, was a polymath. Not just a Jungian or a Freudian, not just a Kantian or a Cartesian. He had studied the ancients and the moderns, the realists and impressionists. He had studied everyone from Aristotle to Zarathustra, from Democritus to Heraclitus, and, as he liked to say, all the itises in between. He was, in a sense, the distillation of all of Western and Eastern thought of the past 2,000 years combined, and it was Professor Jove's opinion, standing as only someone today could on the 21st century peak of all history, heir to all mankind's experience, wisdom, and knowledge, that the greatest source of misery in the world, the greatest cause of anguish and hatred and sadness and death, was neither disease nor race nor religion. It was hope. Hope? Kugel asked. Pessimist, Professor Jove replied, don't start wars. It was hope, according to Professor Jove, that was keeping Kugel up at night. It was hope that was making him angry. Give up, read the sign on the wall behind Jove's book-covered desk. You'll live longer. But you've been to Yale, Harvard, Cambridge, said Kugel. That's how I know, said Professor Jove. He had waited weeks for an appointment. We are rational creatures, Professor Jove explained. Hope is irrational. We thus set ourselves up for one dispiriting fall after the next. Anger and depression are not diseases or dysfunctions or anomalies. They are perfectly rational responses to the myriad avoidable disappointments that begin in a thoroughly irrational hope. Kugel wasn't sure he understood. Professor Jove smiled warmly. Tell me, he said, Hitler was last century's greatest what? Kugel had shrugged. Monster? Optimist, said Professor Jove. Hitler was the most unabashed, doe-eyed optimist of the last 100 years. That's why he was the biggest monster. Have you ever heard of anything as outrageously hopeful as the final solution? Not just that there could be a solution, to anything, mind you, while we have yet to cure the common cold, but a final one no less. Full of hope the Fuhrer was, a dreamer, a romantic even, yes? If I just kill this one, gas that one, everything will be okay. I tell you this with absolute certainty. Every morning, Adolf Hitler woke up, made himself a cup of coffee, and asked himself how to make the world a better place. We all know his answer, but the answer isn't nearly as important as the question. The only thing more naively hopeful than the final solution is the ludicrous dictum to which it gave birth. Never again. How many times since never again has it happened again? 3, 4, that we know of, mind you? Mao, optimist. Stalin, optimist. Pol Pot, optimist. Here's a good rule for life, Kugel. No matter where you happen to live or when you happen to be born, when someone rises up and promises that things are going to be better, run. Hide. Pessimists don't build gas chambers. I just want my family to be safe, said Kugel. I just want the world to leave us alone. Is that asking too much? What, asked Professor Jove, did Jesus Christ say when they nailed him to the cross? I don't know, said Kugel. What did Jesus Christ say when they nailed him to the cross? He said, ouch, said Professor Jove. I don't get it, said Kugel. There's nothing to get, said Professor Jove. It hurt. First they whipped him half to death, then they held him down and nailed iron spikes through his wrists. If he was lucky, they did the same to his feet. The weight of his body bearing down on his chest made it difficult to breathe, and he died, slowly and agonizingly, from respiratory distress. I still don't get it, said Kugel. There is hurt in this world, said Professor Jove. There is pain. Hoping there won't be only makes it worse.
Thank you.
I'm available for weddings and bar mitzvahs.